Okay, continuing on the subject of mood, we're now going to talk about millenarianism. Millenarianism is the idea that the world is coming to an end, and it's also usually associated with the idea that there's the righteous people who recognize that the world is coming to an end and are preparing for it, and the non-righteous people who are blasé about the coming end of the world. And the idea is that the righteous and virtuous people will be rewarded, and the non-righteous people heading for disaster and will be punished. And millenarianism is a mood that can grip a society when there's a sense of finiteness, a sense of increasing constraints on living space and natural resources. So let's write that up. And a time when millenarianism gripped European society was in the 1500s and 1600s. So this was a time when there had been a lot of population growth. And it was also a time of the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. So there had been a growth of manufacturing, an intensification of manufacturing and industry. And both these things led to a great demand for firewood, because firewood was the main fuel source of those times. And with more people wanting to heat their houses and cook, and with the embryonic factories needing firewood for pottery and for ironworking, firewood was coming under serious pressure. So let's write that up. Shortages of firewood were a serious concern at that time, and a lot of people were writing about it and suggesting solutions and so forth. And one of the reactions to this was in England the enclosures movement. So in the past, each village had just a few huge open fields, 3 or 4 open fields, and each villager had a few strips in each of the fields and farmed those strips. And the woodland around the village and the pasture was all held in common. And this involved a lot of coordination between the villagers, and there were the committees to decide how things were used and so on. Well, with the enclosures movement, each villager was allocated their own private plot of land that was then contiguous. And this led to a great improvement in the efficiency of farming. Once farmers had their own little farms, they could use them more rationally and make decisions for themselves. So with this enclosures movement, there was an intensification of farming and an increasing efficiency. So this made it possible to support more people. But nevertheless, there was still a sense that there were finite constraints on the population at that time. And this led to millenarian attitudes. So Luther, for example, said that the world would end, EOW, end of the world, 1600. And when that didn't happen, nevertheless, in the 17th century, Jack Goldstone points out some 70% of religious pamphlets were millenarian in their subject matter. So 70% of religious pamphlets were talking about the end of the world and urging people to prepare for the end of the world. And then how did this millenarian mood of society in those centuries come to an end? Well, a key factor was the adoption of coal as a new energy source. So suddenly the firewood shortages entirely went away as a concern. Coal now became an abundant source of energy. There seemed to be masses of coal in the ground, and all those worries had disappeared. And also the factories, as the Industrial Revolution progressed, provided an outlet for surplus population from the rural areas. So it took away all that sense of constraints on living space and on resources. And so with it, the millenarian mood disappeared and people became more optimistic about the future. And another time of millenarian mood in Europe was the early 19th century. So this was a time when the great discoveries that had been made since the time of Columbus were drying up. So there were no great new continents being discovered. And, the American East Coast was now becoming an advanced civilization, just like Europe itself. So it no longer seemed like virgin territory that had resources and living space that was still waiting to be used. So let's write that up. This was a time when it felt like discoveries were drying up, and this led to a millenarian mood with the Romantic movement. Romanticism. So this was opposed to the industrialization that was taking place at that time, the spread of factories and growth of cities, and it called for people to move back towards simpler ways of life and being closer to nature. So let's write that up. And there was a general dissatisfaction with the contemporary world, a feeling that things were heading in the wrong direction. This couldn't continue and it was leading to disaster. And the sort of literature and the art, even the music of the Romantic movement, conveys a sense of anxiety about the future and a general feeling of depression or a feeling of sadness, and a kind of ineffable sadness, something you can't really put your finger on, but just generally feel sad about the way the world is. But you know that you just don't like the way the world is heading, and all these factories and all these people and all these dirty cities. And then how did this sort of millenarian mood come to an end? Well, a couple of factors. How did it come? What brought an end? One was the pacification of the American West, and the California gold rush, and also the opening up of Africa, in part due, for example, to medical advances, because Africa had previously been very dangerous for Europeans with tropical diseases. So both these things created a new sense of abundance and vastness. There seemed to be, after all, whole areas of land that were not really well occupied at the moment and that could absorb much larger populations, and also were abundant with resources. So back the wrong way around, but so there was created a sense of vastness, more space for population, and also new natural resources in California. As I mentioned, the gold rush in Africa was seen as a source also of gold and diamonds and other raw materials. So suddenly that sense of finiteness disappeared, evaporated, and with it so did the romantic mood, the mood of romanticism, the millenarianism. And another period of millenarianism in Western civilization began in the late 20th century. So this was a time when there had been great technological advances in medicine and agriculture, so great improvements in health and great improvements in the availability of food. And this had led to a great growth of world population. And this created a sense of overpopulation, there being too many people, which was similar to, you know, what had occurred in the 1500s and 1600s. There was a sense then of too many people for what the land could support. And another factor at that time was the growing sense of it being a small world. We live in a small world. The world is small. Some of the factors were the emergence of jet travel. So, you know, the rest of the world seemed pretty close. You could get to it very easily, and it was really quite small. Also, global telecommunications made people feel distances were quite small around the world. And then another big emotional factor, it's been suggested, is the thanks to the space program, images, photographs of the Earth from space, particularly with the Apollo program and astronauts on the way to the moon being able to look back and take photographs of the Earth and you know, the whole Earth in one frame. Well, this was quite a revelation at the time. You know, today we're used to it, but in those days, you know, people had never seen the Earth like that. The Earth was this huge thing that you were standing on, but you couldn't see the whole of it by any means. But now suddenly you could see, gosh, you know, that is the planet Earth, and it looked very small and very fragile. And it gave people a sense of the finiteness of the Earth, the limits of the Earth. So all these things created that sense of finiteness that leads to millenarianism. And this mood is expressed in a whole range of, you know, cultural developments of the time. An early one was the book The Population Bomb, very influential book at the time, 1968, Paul Ehrlich. Which argued that, you know, there's just too many people for what this tiny, small little planet can support, and this is going to lead to, you know, plagues with so many people packed together, and new viruses could spread through this tight, dense, packed population like wildfire. There's going to be famines because, you know, with so many people on this small, fragile little planet, we're not going to be able to feed them all, and they're still reproducing at a terrific rate, so that will lead to famines. And of course, with all these pressures, social stresses caused by these things, so many people living packed together and all competing for the same small pool of resources, that's going to lead to war. And you know, that in turn, all these factors are going to lead to the collapse of civilization, and beyond that, possibly even the end of the human race, and even in the most extreme case, the end of planet Earth altogether, as we blow ourselves up, overexploit it, and destroy the environment and the ecosystem. And this was also the time of the founding of the great environmental movements like the Friends of the Earth in 1971, Greenpeace around the same time, and the European Green Parties were being founded in the 1970s. And then there was the book The Limits to Growth, which was based on a computer model of growth of population and the pollution it produced and the amount of the world's resources that were being used, and predicted that it was all going to turn over by the middle of the 21st century and collapse into disaster. And so that was limits to growth, 1972. And there you have it in the title, you know, the limits to growth, the sense of finiteness. And these things converged on the global warming narrative, anthropogenic global warming, the idea that humans are adversely affecting the world's ecosystems and particularly the global climate. Again, this planet is small and fragile, and there are all these people over it and doing all these, you know, creating these factories, belching out smoke and so on. So it's leading to destruction of the earth. And so the response to that is sort of against industry, anti-industrial, like in the Romantic movement, that, you know, these factories are highly undesirable. We need to go back to simpler lifestyles. So let's put that anti-industrial, and also calls for restrictions on people's lifestyles, you know, to use less of the planet's resources. So, you know, restrictions on travel, for instance. You know, the idea that people shouldn't be jumping on planes for trivial reasons, and they should try and reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their impact on the Earth's environment and their consumption of its finite resources. And we can see also with this that there's very much a semiotic, emotional aspect to it, as, to use a phrase we considered in the last part of this lesson due to Peter Turchin and co. So it's about symbols and the emotions that they evoke. So symbols like, you know, flowers, flower power in the late 60s, or polar bears clinging to ice floes, or factory chimneys belching out great billowing smoke. These things create an emotional feeling of overconsumption of the Earth's resources and the Earth heading towards some catastrophe. And although these, you know, this whole scientific process associated with this, as we saw again in the last part, many social theorists have argued that humans actually respond to situations in an emotional way, and the logic and the rationalization comes afterwards to kind of explain what they did. But they actually acted based on emotion, but they then tailor their logic to explain what they did. So, you know, some people, such social theorists might say that all the science around global warming and all these environmental ideas is really that kind of post hoc rationalization. People actually feel these things. They feel that there's a problem with global warming or that humanity's impact on Earth for these reasons. These are the things that made people feel the Earth is small and fragile, and these prophets have, you know, of the environmentalist movement have planted these ideas that create this emotional reaction, and then the science comes in to explain, you know, well, why that's logical and reasonable. And a sign of this, you know, sense of the finiteness of the Earth is also the worldwide decline in birth rate. The worldwide birth rate decline. So, you know, with this sense of finiteness and that we're reaching the limits of what the Earth can support, we're coming up against the carrying capacity of the earth and our technological use of it, people are cutting back on having children. They don't feel that they can increase the population. And this started in Europe, but it's now worldwide. Global population is tailing off drastically. It was greatly expanding in the late 20th century when the millenarian movement started here, but it's now very much coming to a plateau. And this has happened before. I'll put ditto. AD 1, around the time of Christ. We also see in the world population charts a stagnation of the world birth rate or world population. So the net birth rate declined to pretty much zero around AD 1. And that was again caused by, we can attribute that to a sense of finiteness at those times, because this was a time when from the Mediterranean all the way across to China, the vast bulk of the world's population was ruled over by just 4 empires in a line from west to east. And and those empires had reached the limits of their expansion, so it seemed like there was nowhere else to go, and so there was no free areas for people to move into, because everything was controlled by these empires, and these empires themselves had run out of steam. They had, their boundaries were now the maximum they would ever be. Again, finiteness then caused a birth rate decline, and that's what we're experiencing today. Again, so emphasizing this sense of finiteness. And Jim Penman, with his emphasis on hormones and their effect on human behavior, he finds that birth rate decline is related to certain changes in social behavior as well. So, we could say finiteness, which manifests in decline in the birth rate, also manifests in certain types of behavior, which, to use hedonism, to use Penman's argument, hedonism, pleasure seeking. So rather than working hard and building up industries, people just enjoy what they can today. And also he says blurred gender roles. So the distinctions between men and women decreasing, women moving into sort of traditional men's roles, and men taking over traditional women's roles. And also he says loosening of morals. So, things like divorce becomes acceptable. So Penman claims that if you look back through the history of Western civilization from Roman times, the birth rate increases and decreases, and when the birth rate decreases, you get these factors of mood, hedonism, gender blurring, and looser morals.
The rat utopia experiments of John Calhoun are also relevant, though this course focuses on history and historical processes, so pure sociobiology is mostly out of scope.
And then we might ask, well, when is all this going to come to an end, if it is? What could bring about an end to this? Well, it will be things that restore that sense of vastness and abundance. Contradicting the idea that the world is small and fragile. Things that make us feel that actually there's lots of resources for us and lots of living space. Well, one factor may be new energy sources. Particularly, for example, nuclear fusion, which is actually making sort of reasonable strides recently. But also nuclear fission, the traditional type of nuclear power, if that can be made safer, more readily available, more compact, quicker to build, and those are things that are happening today as well. Those, if that, so one or other of these nuclear technologies, or both, will make energy much cheaper. And that will take away this idea that, hey, energy, you know, we're coming up against the limits of energy. Actually, there's masses of energy. And another possible development is what I call the opening up of the space frontier. So if we can have, you know, vast orbiting cities with millions of people up in space, and astronauts' boots tramping all over the moon and over Mars, and drilling in and finding vast deposits of minerals. Again, that will make people think, actually, you know, we're not really cooped up on this tiny little planet and bursting at the seams. We can move off this Earth, and there's then plenty of space. There's these empty planets with, you know, lots of opportunity for us, and those empty planets are empty of people, but they're full of natural resources. And with our you know, new energy sources as well, we can easily exploit those. And so the whole sort of story of human progress can take off again. Now, some people might say, well, it won't be space, it'll be the oceans. The oceans are, you know, 3/4 of the Earth's surface, and they're hardly used by humans at the moment. So they're of, you know, a vast potential habitat and vast potential source of raw materials. So so it might be the oceans, but anything that creates a new sense of vast spaces for us to live in, and abundant natural resources for us to exploit, will take away this sense of us living on a tiny planet and being cooped up and bursting at the seams. And when that feeling goes away, then all this mood, the millenarian mood, the millenarian movements, will also evaporate. Now, the theoretical historian Geoffrey Blainey distinguishes between the millenarian attitudes and the non-millenarian attitudes as what he calls pessimists versus optimists. So the millenarian attitude is pessimist. It's that, you know, we can't go on living the way we are. It's all going to end in tears. And the non-millenarian attitude is optimist. It's that, oh, you know, of course we can keep going on, developing, growing, everything is going to be fine. So he suggests that there are different sets of attitudes associated with these two basic moods. So let's write those up. Okay, so here are Blainey's sets of characteristics of these two ways of thinking about humanity and our relationship with nature, which Blainey calls the optimist and the pessimist. So we can just have a look at a few of them. Humans are intelligent, that's what optimists believe. Pessimists, humans are not so clever as they think. Optimists think industrial civilization is admirable. Pessimists think industrial civilization is sick. Optimists love new technology, they think it's beneficial. Pessimists think new technology, we might think of AI here today, is dangerous. Optimists emphasize reason and logic, pessimists emphasize imagination and instinct. Optimists love the city life, pessimists love the rural life. Optimists think the work ethic is very important. Pessimists think leisure is more important. Here we might sort of think of what Jim Penman talks about, the hedonism that's associated with times of declining birth rate, which are associated with times of sense of finiteness, which are associated with sense of pessimism about the future. Optimists think that nature is there for the service of humanity and we need to harness it and exploit it. Pessimists think that nature needs to be left alone and it is bountiful in its own right. Related to this, optimists think that science will provide. So human science and technology is the way to provide for humans, whereas pessimists think that nature will provide. Optimists believe in specialization, pessimists believe in all-rounder approach to life. Optimists love competition, pessimists emphasize cooperation. Optimists think that the way we are today, modern man, highly technological civilization, that is the ideal, and this is great and wonderful. The pessimists believe that that it's actually the simple, the noble savage, the people who live simply. They're the ideal. That's the ideal way of life for humans. And optimists believe that the golden age is now and in the future, that things are getting better all the time, but it's certainly not in the past. Whereas pessimists think that the golden age was in the past, things were better then, before we built all these factories and roads and what have you. And but also maybe they also believe in a golden age in a far off utopian future when all this industrial civilization has either collapsed of its own accord or been swept away through our enlightenment. So this was written in the late 80s, and you can see firstly the very terminology optimist versus pessimist has some, is value laden about these different attitudes. And then I think also people might think as they look through these, well, actually I picked some from this side and some from this side, so it's not clear that these are necessarily entirely separate syndromes. The point is, though, that firstly, these aren't necessarily about what we as individuals feel. Yes, we might incline towards the optimist or the pessimist side of this chart, but Blainey's real point is that this describes moods of society, and that we see a swing. His book in which he describes this is called The Great Seesaw, from the pessimistic to the optimist back to the pessimist. There's a constant swing in society between these moods. And if we're relating this to finiteness which from everything we've been saying so far would tend to suggest we move into this pessimist end of the world type of attitude, that the things are going wrong, then this suggests that if there is an oscillation between these two, that there's an oscillation in finiteness. So it suggests that development, progress occurs in a kind of pulse-like manner, that we come up to some limit and then we break through that limit, and then growth continues but comes up to another limit, and then we break through that. And so it goes up in these maybe logistic type pulses, and associated with the sort of surging and then stagnation of progress is reflected in the social mood towards a more millenarian mood, and back towards this what Blainey calls optimistic mood.